That should do it. Okay. Hello there, everyone. It's good to be back with you, and I hope that life is treating you well today. My name is Soulkeeper. Today we're going to be doing ASMR Christmas stories, like we have been recently. Hello, Dick. How's it going? It's good to be back with you, and I hope that you're doing well tonight. We've got ads coming up in just a few seconds. This is going to disable the pre-roll for the next hour. How are you doing, Dick? I'm glad to see you. We're starting the night off with Christmas every day, and then continuing stave 3 of A Christmas Carol. I'm always glad to see you. Let's go ahead and give this a little adjustment before we get here. You'll be in the background doing some aquarium maintenance. Well, I kind of figure that most people are going to be lurking, Dick. So I guess it all works out, doesn't it? Hey, Storm Zenith, how's it going? Let's get ourselves a little drinky poo before we begin. I've noticed that we've been getting a lot of impressions from the ASMR category recently. Over the past 2 streams, we've gotten thousands of impressions. So I figure the worst that we could do is try it again, right? Why not? Hell, we're already 2 chapters into A Christmas Carol. Today we're going to be doing Christmas Every Day, and we're going to be doing chapter 3 of A Christmas Carol. Can I kick it? Yes, you can. Mercs. How's it going, Mercs? I hope that everything sounds alright on your guys' end. Hope that nothing's too loud. Or that nothing else is wrong. What's up? Well, I thought we'd come on here and do this, since, well, we've been doing a little bit more recently. Why not, right? We're going to start the night with Christmas Every Day. How are you doing, Marks? I'm always glad to see you, dude. You know, I'm wearing a gray tank top, and it looks a little bit green on camera right now. I noticed that. Funny how things work on camera sometimes. Doing great. Ready, getting comfy, do this ASMR. That's good. Well, with that, maybe we should go ahead and begin, right? That might be a plan. Let's jump into Christmas Every Day and begin. The little girl came into her papa's study, as she always did Saturday morning before breakfast, and asked for a story. He tried to beg off that morning, for he was very busy, but she would not let him. So he began. Well, once there was a little pig. She put her hand over his mouth and stopped him at the word. She said she had heard little pig stories till she was perfectly sick of them. Well, what kind of story shall I tell then? About Christmas It's getting to be the season. It's past Thanksgiving already. It seems to me, her papa argued, that I've told as often about Christmas as I have about little pigs. No difference. Christmas is more interesting. Well, her papa roused himself from his writing by a great effort. Well then, I'll tell you about the little girl that wanted it every Christmas, every day in the year. How would you like that? First rate, said the little girl, and she nestled into comfortable shape in his lap, ready for listening. Very well then. This little pig... Oh, what are you pounding me for? Because you said little pig instead of little girl. Oh, thank you, Marks. I appreciate that. I should like to know what's the difference between a little pig and a little girl that wanted it Christmas every day. Papa, said the little girl warningly, if you don't go on, I'll give it to you. And at this, her papa darted off like lightning and began to tell the story as fast as he could. What's the matter, Marks? Well, once there was a little girl who liked Christmas so much that she wanted it to be Christmas every day in the year. And as soon as Thanksgiving was over, she began to send postal cards to the old Christmas fairy to ask if she mightn't have it. But the old fairy never answered any of the postals. And after a while, the little girl found out that the fairy was pretty particular and wouldn't notice anything but letters. Not even correspondence cards and envelopes, but real letters on sheets of paper and sealed outside with a monogram, or your initial anyway. So then she began to send her letters, and in about 3 weeks, or just the day before Christmas, she got a letter from the fairy saying she might have it Christmas every day for a year, and then they would see about having it longer. Hello, Stank. Stank on you, how's it going? I'm glad to see you tonight. It looks like Stank just sent Mercs the Maverick to the dollar store. Bring us back some snackies and drinkies, Mercs. Daddy's thirsty. He wants his cold brew. I'm a little parched, you could say. What's going on, guys? Here's a cup of cheer for you this holiday season. Shell, thanks for the 8 months in a row. Let's go. Yes. Yeah, let's go. One of us. Yeah. Thank you so much, Shell 5. I appreciate that. Oh, yeah. This one's for you. Welcome back, Mercs. I'm glad you love this Stank on you. I wasn't sure if everybody I thought it disabled blurb. Oh, I did, but you have it on your browser extension, don't you? Well, I disabled it for obvious reasons. I'm sorry, Stank. I forgot about the browser extension. I can't do too much about that. A for effort, though. Thank you, Stank. That'd be pretty funny if it actually played. And I'm sure it would get people all riled up in this category. Well, I'll still dance because it makes me feel so good. Yeah. God, I look jacked as hell under this lighting. Stormzy, thanks for those 200 bits. Let's go. That's right, baby. That's right. Ooh. 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 Yeah. Yeah. Let's take a sippy sip. Thank you, Stormzy, for those 200 bits. The little girl was a good deal excited already, preparing for the old-fashioned once-a-year Christmas that was coming the next day. And perhaps the fairy's promise didn't make such an impression on her as it would have made at some other time. She just resolved to keep it to herself and surprise everybody with it, as it kept coming true, and then it slipped out of her mind altogether. She had a splendid Christmas. She went to bed early so as to let Santa Claus have a chance at the stockings. And in the morning, she was up at the first of anybody and went and felt them, and found hers all lumpy with packages of candy and oranges and grapes, and pocketbooks and rubber balls, and all kinds of small presents. And her big brothers, with nothing but the tongs in them, and her young lady sisters, with a new silk umbrella, and her papas and mamas with potatoes and pieces of coal wrapped up in tissue paper, just as they always had every Christmas. Then she waited around till the rest of the family were up, and she was the first to burst into the library when the doors were opened and look at the large presents laid out on the library table. Books and portfolios and boxes of stationery and breastpins and dolls and little stoves and dozens of handkerchiefs and inkstands and skates and snow shovels and photograph frames and little easels and boxes of watercolors and Turkish paste and nougat and candy cherries and dolls' houses and waterproofs and the big Christmas tree lighted and standing in a wastebasket in the middle. A hype train just started, guys. 3 minutes ago. 3 minutes ago. And thank you for the hype train, guys. I appreciate that very much. We still have a minute 30 on the hype train. If we get to level 3, if we complete level 3 in the next minute, what would you guys like to do? What would you guys like to do if we get to level 3 on the hype train? I don't know. We have a minute to decide. a little less than a minute. Show, thanks for those 100 bits. Storm Zenith, thanks for those 400 bits. C Nips, shirtless stream from Chastity. Chastity wants nipples. Chastity wants Soulkeeper to get naked. Thanks for those 400 bits, Storm Zenith. Let's go. Taking seconds left on this hype train. This one's for you, Storm Zenith. Thank you guys. And thank you, Shell for subscribing to Prime for 8 months. 8 months. 8 months. Thank you for that 81% hype train, guys. 81%. Next time we get a hype train, think about what you guys would like to see. And if we get up to level 3, we'll go ahead and go for it. This one's for you, Storm Zenith. Shirtless stream. Shirtless. Soulkeeper gets naked over on some channel or another. That's funny. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate the excitement. And welcome, you guys. My name is Soulkeeper. We're reading Christmas Every Day, followed by Chapter 3 of A Christmas Carol. She had a splendid Christmas all day. She ate so much candy that she did not want any breakfast. And the whole forenoon, the presents kept pouring in that the expressman had not time to deliver the night before. And she went around giving the presents she had got for other people and came home and ate turkey and cranberry for dinner, and plum pudding and nuts and raisins and oranges and more candy. And her papa said he would see if his house was turned into that sort of fool's paradise another year. And they had a light supper, and pretty early everybody went to bed cross. Here the little girl pounded her papa in the back. Again. Well now, what now? Did I say pigs? You made them act like pigs. Well, didn't they? No matter. You oughtn't to put it into a story. Very well, then. I'll take it all out. Her father went on. The little girl slept very heavily, and she slept very late. But she was wakened at last by the other children dancing round her bed with their stockings full of presents in their hands. What is it? Said the little girl, and she rubbed her eyes and tried to rise up in bed. Christmas, 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 they all shouted and waved their stockings. Nonsense, it was Christmas yesterday. Her brothers and sisters just laughed. We don't know about that. It's Christmas today anyway. You come into the library and see. Then all at once, it flashed on the little girl that the fairy was keeping her promise, and her year of Christmases was beginning. She was dreadfully sleepy, but she sprang up like a lark a lark that had overeaten itself and got the bread cross and darted into the library. There it was again. Books and portfolios and boxes of stationery and breastpins. You needn't go over it all, Papa. I guess I can remember just what was there, said the little girl. Oh, thank you, Maverick Hunter. I appreciate that. They're doing pretty okay. I'm getting a lot more jacked than I was. I can tell already. I've only been working out steadily for maybe a couple of weeks again, but man, it's really showing. Steak Onion Time just sent Maverick Hunter X05 to the dollar store. Bring us back some snackies and drinkies. When you get back, Maverick, Daddy wants his cold brew. Make a snacky. Well, and there was the Christmas tree blazing away, and the family picking out their presents, but looking pretty sleepy, and her father perfectly puzzled, and her mother ready to cry. I'm sure I don't see how I'm to dispose of all these things, said her mother, and her father said it seemed to him they had something just like it the day before, but he supposed he must have dreamed it. This struck the little girl as the best kind of a joke, and so she ate so much candy she didn't want any breakfast, and went round carrying presents and had turkey and cranberry for dinner, and then went out and coasted and came in with a Papa. Well, what now? What did you promise, you forgetful thing? Oh yes. Hey, J-Dog, how's it going? It's good to see you, J-Dog. I hope that you're doing all right tonight. It's always good to see you. What's going on, J-Dog? Steaky. I'm always glad to see you. Looks like Storm Zenith just sent steak on you to the dollar store. Bring us back some snackies and drinkies. Steak on you. Oh, Daddy wants that cold brew. Daddy's thirsty. I bet you do, Dick. The dollar store is a good investment. Let us know how it is when you get back, Stank. 21 inches, nice. J-Dog, nice. Midnight MC 1997. Thank you for the follow. It's good to have you here. And I hope that you find this very pleasant and relaxing as we read through these Christmas stories together. 86% IQ, not bad, J-Dog. Let's see how I'm doing. I might be a little dumb tonight. 52. I'm doing. Hello, Episode Man. What's going on? I hope that you're doing good tonight. What's going on, my friend? A 4-inch. Oh boy, I got that teeny weeny tonight, guys. I've got tiny penis. Well, the next day, it was just the same thing over again, and everybody getting crosser. And at the end of a week's time, so many people had lost their tempers that you could pick up lost tempers anywhere. They perfectly strewed the ground. Even when people tried to recover the tempers, they usually got somebody else's, and it made the most dreadful mix. The little girl began to get frightened. keeping the secret all to herself. She wanted to tell the mother, but she didn't dare to, and she was ashamed to ask the fairy to take back her gift. It seemed ungrateful and ill-bred, and she thought she would try to stand it, but she hardly knew how she could for a whole year. So it went on, and it was Christmas on St. Valentine's Day and Washington's birthday, just the same as any day. And it didn't skip on the 1st of April, though everything was counterfeit that day. And that was some little relief. It looks like Stankonia just took Storm Zenith and pinned him in the middle of the ring. Let us know how it feels to get pinned for the count, Storm Zenith, when you get back. Some women prefer it. I think your sources are a little faulty, Dick. Sad to say. Thank you, Abba Zappa Man. I appreciate that. I know, J-Dog. I don't even know why I'm wearing underwear right now, because I've got no hog to put them in. 5 months, 19 days, 12 hours. 5 months, 19 days, 12 hours. My, how the time flies, J-Dog. After a while, coal and potatoes began to be awfully scarce. So many had been wrapped up in tissue paper to fool papas and mamas with. Turkeys got to be about $1,000 apiece. Papa? Well, what? You're beginning to fib. Well, 2,000 then. And they got to passing off almost anything for turkeys. Half-grown hummingbirds and even rooks out of the Arabian Nights. The real turkeys were so scarce. And cranberries, well, they asked a diamond apiece for cranberries. All the woods and orchards were cut down for Christmas trees. And where the woods and orchards used to be, it looked just like a stubble field with the stumps. After a while, they had to make Christmas trees out of rags and stuff them with bran, like old-fashioned dolls. But there were plenty of rags because people got so poor, buying presents for one another, that they couldn't get any new clothes, and they just wore their old ones to tatters. They got so poor that everybody had to go to the poorhouse, except the confectioners, and the fancy storekeepers, and the picture booksellers, and the expressmen. And they got so rich and so proud that they would hardly wait upon a person when he came to buy. It was perfectly shameful. Thank you, J-Dog. I appreciate that. God, I hope so, Red. At least I try my best. 11 months, 14 days. Wow, 11 months, almost an entire year, Storm Zenith. It's been quite a time, hasn't it? Almost an entire year. It's been quite a while. It's funny to see who's still here after all this time. You know, there's always people who come and go. Sometimes we see them again, sometimes not. 92 inches. My goodness, that's a lot. I don't know how your pants holds it. Hashtag pants tent. Thank you, Marks. Well, after it had gone on about 3 or 4 months, the little girl, whenever she came into the room in the morning and saw those great, ugly, lumpy stockings dangling at the fireplace, and the disgusting presents around everywhere, used to just sit down and burst out crying. In 6 months, she was perfectly exhausted. She couldn't even cry anymore. She just lay in the lounge and rolled her eyes and panted. About the beginning of October, she took to sitting down on dolls wherever she found them, French dolls or any kind. She hated the sight of them so, and by Thanksgiving she was crazy and just slammed her presents across the room. I do too, oh Dick. I miss Blaze too. I wonder what happened. I don't know. Oh, did I accidentally remove the VIP from you, Marks? We had most of the VIPs I took off were from people who haven't been around. But I guess I was just like clicking on the list so much that I might have gotten a couple of people who weren't who have been here. There we go. Thank you, Max. I appreciate it. I did remove our moderators, though, because, well, I'm not sure things are large enough to really have a moderator anymore. I could probably just handle it myself. By the time, people didn't carry presents around nicely anymore. By that time, people didn't carry presents around nicely anymore. They flung them over the fence or through the window or anything, instead of running their tongues out and taking great pains to write for dear Papa or Mama or brother or sister or Susie or Sammy or Billy or Bobby or Jimmy or Jenny or whoever it was, and troubling to get the spelling right, and then signing their names in Xmas 1800. They used to write in the gift books, "Take it, you horrid old thing," and then go and bang it against the front door. Nearly everybody had built barns to hold their presents, but pretty soon the barns overflowed, and then they used to let them lie out in the rain or anywhere. Sometimes the police used to come and tell them to shovel their presents off the sidewalk, or they would arrest them. "I thought you said everybody had gone to the poorhouse," interrupted the little girl. "They did go at first," said her papa. "But after a while the poorhouses got so full that they had to send the people back to their own houses. They tried to cry when they got back, but they couldn't make the least sound." Why couldn't they? Because they had lost their voices saying Merry Christmas so much. Did I tell you how it was on the 4th of July? No, how was it? And the little girl nestled closer in expectation of something uncommon. Thank you, Chastity. I appreciate it. Thank you, J-Dog. How are you doing, Odick? Bringing that stank in the stream. I certainly hope so. I missed having a little bit of stank on here. If you know what I mean. Well, the night before, the boys stayed up to celebrate, as they always do, and fell asleep before 12 o'clock as usual, expecting to be wakened by the bells and cannon. But it was nearly 8 o'clock before the first boy in the United States woke up. And then he found out what the trouble was. As soon as he could get his clothes on, he ran out of the house and smashed a big cannon torpedo down on the pavement. But it didn't make any more noise than a damp wad of paper. And after he tried about 20 or 30 more, he began to pick them up and look at them. Every single torpedo was a big raisin. Then he just streaked it upstairs and examined his firecrackers and the toy pistol and $2 collection of fireworks, and found that they were nothing but sugar and candy painted up to look like fireworks. Before 10 o'clock, every boy in the United States found out that his 4th of July had turned into Christmas things. And then they just sat down and cried. They were so mad. There are about 20 million boys in the United States, and so you can imagine what a noise they made. Some men got together before night with a little powder that hadn't turned into purple sugar yet, and they said they would fire off one cannon. Anyway, but the cannon burst into 1,000 pieces, for it was nothing but rock candy, and some of the men nearly got killed. The 4th of July orations all turned into Christmas carols, and when anybody tried to read the Declaration, instead of saying, "When in the course of human events it becomes necessary," he was sure to sing, "God rest you, merry gentlemen." It was perfectly awful. The little girl drew a deep sigh of satisfaction. And how was it at Thanksgiving? Her papa hesitated. Well, I'm almost afraid to tell you. I'm afraid you'll think it's wicked. Well, tell anyway, said the little girl. Hello, Mamers. How are you? It's good to see you, Mamers. Thank you for that enlarging the emote earlier, by the way. I appreciated that. And also thank you for this Christmas tree, this very large Christmas tree. How are you doing, Mamers? Amy, I appreciate that. Good God. I feel like I've got veins starting to burst out of my arms. That's nice. I just noticed that. Well, before it came Thanksgiving, it had leaked out who had caused all these Christmases. The little girl had suffered so much that she had talked about it in her sleep. And after that, hardly anybody would play with her. People just perfectly despised her, because if it had not been for her greediness, it wouldn't have happened. And now, when it came Thanksgiving, and she wanted them to go to church and have squash pie and turkey and show their gratitude, they said that all the turkeys had been eaten up for her old Christmas dinners, and if she would stop the Christmases, they would see about the gratitude. Wasn't it dreadful? And the very next day, the little girl began to send letters to the Christmas fairy, and then telegrams to stop it. But it didn't do any good. And then she got to calling at the fairy's house. But the girl that came to the door always said, "Not at home," or "engaged," or at dinner, or something like that. And so it went on till it came to the old once-a-year Christmas Eve. The little girl fell asleep, and when she woke up in the morning, she found it was all nothing but a dream, suggested the little girl. No, indeed, said her papa. It was all every bit true. Well, what did she find out then? Why, that it wasn't Christmas at last, and wasn't ever going to be anymore. Now it's time for breakfast. The little girl held her papa fast around the neck. You shan't go if you're going to leave it so. How do you want it left? Christmas once a year. All right, said her papa. And he went on again. I'm happy you're here too, Amy. Thank you. Well, these workouts I'm doing seem like they're paying off, so I'm pretty happy about it. I know. No more Christmas, imagine that, Marx. No more Christmas. Could you imagine a world like that where you have so much Christmas that Christmas is just ended? J-Dog is 96% jabroni, Chastity 91%. Not huffing that much cum, though, Chastity. Nice. Let me see where I am right now. I'm curious. Where am I? 7% jabroni. I'm barely a jabroni. So I'm huffing a lot of cum, though. 77% is a lot of cum. 34% isodic. 57% based. J-Dog. That's impressive. Not bad. Odic is not huffing that much cum. Only 15%. Well, there was the greatest rejoicing all over the country, and it extended clear up into Canada. The people met together everywhere and kissed and cried for joy. The city carts went around and gathered up all the candy and raisins and nuts and dumped them into the river, and it made the fish perfectly sick. And the whole United States, as far out as Alaska, was one blaze of bonfires where the children were burning up their gift books and presents of all kinds. They had the greatest time. The little girl went to thank the old fairy because she had stopped being. The little girl went to thank the fairy because she had stopped its being Christmas. And she said she hoped she would keep her promise and see that Christmas never, never came again. Then the fairy frowned and asked her if she was sure she knew what she meant. And the little girl asked her, why not? And the old fairy said that now she was behaving just as greedily as ever. And she said she would be willing to have it Christmas about once in 1,000 years. And then she said 100. And then she said 10. And at last she got down to 1. Then the fairy said that was the good old way that had pleased people ever since Christmas began. And she was agreed. Then the little girl said, what are your shoes made of? And the fairy said, leather. And the little girl said, bargain's done forever, and skipped off, and hippity-hopped the whole way home. She was so glad. How will that do? Asked the papa. First rate, said the little girl. But she hated to have the story stop, and was rather sober. However, her mamma put her head in at the door, and asked her papa, are you never coming to breakfast? What have you been telling that child? Oh, just a moral tale. The little girl caught him around the neck again. We know. Don't you tell what, Papa? Don't you tell what? Abby, 94% cum muffer. How are you doing, Abby? It's good to see you, Abby. What's going on? I'm glad to see you as always. Oh, look at that emote work, Maverick. That's nice. Merc's trying to silence you. Well. That, my friends, marks the end of Christmas every day. That's the end of Christmas every day. It is about time to get into Chapter 2. Of A Christmas Carol. We've already done the first 2 chapters. This is where the story gets especially heavy. Chapter 3. Chapter 3. Did I say Chapter 2? Chapter 3. I may have misspoke, Mercs. It's okay. Chapter 3. It's the second spirit. Let's bring the mic a little bit closer. There we go. That should be good. The second of the 3 spirits. Hello, Yui kid. How are you doing tonight? I'm glad to see you. As always. You know, Abby, I wonder how that would go. Awaking in the middle of a prodigiously tough snore, and sitting up in bed to get his thoughts together, Scrooge had no occasion to be told that the bell was again upon the stroke of 1. He felt that he was restored to consciousness in the right nick of time for the especial purpose of holding a conference with the second messenger, dispatched to him through Jacob Marley's intervention. But finding that he turned uncomfortably cold when he began to wonder which of the curtains this new specter would draw back, he put them every one aside with his own hands, and lying down again, established a sharp lookout all round the bed, for he wished to challenge the spirit on the moment of its appearance, and did not wish to be taken by surprise and made nervous. Gentlemen of the free and easy sort, who plume themselves on being acquainted with a move or two, and being usually equal to the time of day, express the wide range of their capacity for adventure by observing that they are good for anything from pitch and toss to manslaughter, between which opposite extremes, no doubt, there lies a tolerably wide and comprehensive range of subjects. Without venturing for Scrooge quite as heartily as this, I don't mind calling on you to believe that he was ready for a good broad field of strange appearances, and that nothing between a baby and a rhinoceros would have astonished him very much. Looks like we're having another fight with the 8-ball. Color me shocked, guys. Good Lord, you guys are still mad at the 8-ball. actually BS. The 8-ball is coming for all you guys, unfortunately. My 8-ball is mean. Why do you guys keep picking fights with my 8-ball? Why do you keep fighting my balls, guys? Everyone's fighting with my balls. Not being prepared for almost anything, he was not by any means prepared for nothing. And consequently, when the bell struck 1 and no shape appeared, he was taken with a violent fit of trembling. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, a quarter of an hour went by. Yet nothing came. All this time he lay upon his bed, the very core and center of a blaze of ruddy light, which streamed upon it when the clock proclaimed the hour, and which, being only light, was more alarming than a dozen ghosts, as he was powerless to make out what it meant, or would be yet, and was sometimes apprehensive that he might be at that very moment an interesting case of spontaneous combustion without having the consolation of knowing it. At last, however, he began to think, or as you or I would have thought at first, for it is always the person not in the predicament who knows what ought to have been done in it, and would unquestionably have done it too. At last, I say, he began to think that the source and secret of this ghostly light might be in the adjoining room, from whence, on further tracing it, it seemed to shine. This idea taking full possession of his mind, he got up softly and shuffled in his slippers to the door. The moment Scrooge's hand was on the lock, a strange voice called him by his name and bade him enter. He obeyed. Thank you, Chastity. I appreciate it. The 8-ball is so sassy. Oh, goodness gracious. Abby asks the 8-ball if it's an asshole, and the 8-ball says, perhaps. God, I really, got myself a doozy of an 8-ball, it looks like. 23%, Abby. Those are some rookie numbers. It was his own room. There was no doubt about that. But it had undergone a transformation, a surprising transformation. The walls and ceiling were so hung with living green that it looked like a perfect grove, from every part of which bright gleaming berries glistened. The crisp leaves of holly, mistletoe, and ivy reflected back the light, as if so many little mirrors had been scattered there, and such a mighty blaze went roaring up the chimney, as that dull petrification of a hearth had never known in Scrooge's time, or Marley's, or for many and many a winter season gone, heaped up on the floor to form a kind of throne where turkeys, geese, game, poultry, brawn, great joints of meat, sucking pigs, long wreaths of sausages, mince pies, plum puddings, barrels of oysters, red-hot chestnuts, cherry-cheeked apples, juicy oranges, luscious pears, immense 12th cakes, and seething bowls of punch that made the chamber dim with their delicious steam. In easy state, upon this couch, there sat a jolly giant, glorious to see, who bore a glowing torch. In shape, not unlike Plenty's horn, and held it up, high up, to shed its light on Scrooge, as he came peeping around the door. "Come in," exclaimed the ghost. "Come in, and know me better, man." Scrooge entered timidly, and hung his head before the spirit. He was not the dogged Scrooge he had been, and though the spirit's eyes were clear and kind, he did not like to meet them. "I am the ghost of Christmas Present," said the spirit. "Look upon me." Scrooge reverently did so. It was clothed in one simple green robe, or mantle, bordered with white fur. This garment hung so loosely on the figure that its capacious breast was bare, as if disdaining to be warded or concealed by any artifice. Its feet, observable beneath the ample folds of the garment, were also bare, and on its head it wore no other covering than a holly wreath, set here and there with shining icicles. Its dark brown curls were long and free as its genial face, its sparkling eye, its open hand, its cheery voice, its unconstrained demeanor, and its joyful air. Girded round its middle was an antique scabbard, but no sword was in it, and the ancient sheath was eaten up with rust. "8-ball, do you mean to be passive-aggressive?" The heavens point to yes. Look at these questions you guys are asking. Do you know where Wesker is? You will have to wait. Do you think you can hang with the Goon Squad any longer? Without a doubt. Hello, Chris. How you doing? It's good to see you, Chris. I'm glad to see you. As always, this 8-ball is incredibly funny. Works. Oh my goodness. "You have never seen the like of me before," exclaimed the spirit. "Never," Scrooge made answer to it. "Have never walked forth with the younger members of my family, meaning for I am very young, my elder brothers born in these later years," pursued the phantom. "I don't think I have," said Scrooge. "I am afraid I have not. Have you had many brothers, spirit?" "More than 1,800, said the ghost. "A tremendous family to provide for," muttered Scrooge. The ghost of Christmas Present rose. "Spirit," said Scrooge submissively, "conduct me where you will. I went forth last night on compulsion, and I learnt a lesson which is working now. Tonight, if you have aught to teach me, let me profit by it." "Touch my robe." Scrooge did as he was told, and held it fast. Holly, mistletoe, red berries, ivy, turkeys, geese, game, poultry, brawn, meat, pigs, sausages, oysters, pies, puddings, fruit, and punch all vanished instantly. So did the room, the fire, the ruddy glow, the hour of night. And they stood in the city streets on Christmas morning, where, for the weather was severe, the people made a rough, but brisk and not unpleasant kind of music in scraping the snow from the pavement in front of their dwellings. And from the tops of their houses, whence it was mad delight to see the boys. And from the tops of their houses, whence it was mad delight to the boys to see it come plumping down into the road below, and splitting into artificial little snowstorms. The house fronts looked black enough, and the windows blacker, contrasting with the smooth white sheet of snow upon the roofs, with the dirtier snow upon the ground, which last deposit had been plowed up in deep furrows by the heavy wheels of carts and wagons, furrows that crossed and recrossed each other hundreds of times, where the great furrows that crossed and recrossed each other hundreds of times, where the great streets branched off and made intricate channels, hard to trace, in the thick yellow mud and icy water. The sky was gloomy, and the shortest streets were choked up with a dingy mist, half thawed, half frozen, whose heavier particles descended in a shower of sooty atoms, as if all the chimneys in Great Britain had, by one constant, caught fire, and were blazing away to their dear heart's content. There was nothing very cheerful in the climate or the town, and yet was there an air of cheerfulness abroad that the clearest summer air and brightest summer sun might have endeavored to diffuse in vain. Is the 8-ball going to apologize to Mercs? Are you being facetious? The questions you guys are asking this 8-ball. I should come up with more responses for this 8-ball. Just like the meanest possible responses. For the people who were shoveling away on the housetops were jovial and full of glee, calling out to one another from the parapets, and now and then exchanging a facetious snowball, better-natured missile far than many a wordy jest, laughing heartily if it went right and not less heartily if it went wrong. The poulterers' shops were still half open, and the fruiterers were radiant in the glory. There were great round pot-bellied baskets of chestnuts, shaped like the waistcoats of jolly old gentlemen, lolling at the doors and tumbling out into the street in their apoplectic opulence. There were ruddy, brown-faced, broad-girthed Spanish onions, shining in the fatness of the growth like Spanish friars, and winking from their shelves in wanton slyness at the girls as they went by, and glanced demurely at the hung-up mistletoe. There were pears and apples clustered high in blooming pyramids. There were bunches of grapes made in the shopkeeper's benevolence to dangle from conspicuous hooks, that people's mouths might water gratis as they passed. There were piles of filberts, mossy and brown, recalling in their fragrance ancient walks among the woods, and pleasant shufflings ankle-deep through withered leaves. There were Norfolk biffins, squat and swarthy, setting off the yellow of the oranges and lemons, and in the great compactness of their juicy persons, urgently entreating and beseeching to be carried home in paper bags, and eaten after dinner, the very gold and silver fish set forth among these choice fruits oats in a bowl. Though members of a dull and stagnant-blooded race appeared to know that there was something going on, and to a fish went gasping round and round their little world in a slow and passionless excitement. "Hello there, AJ. How's it going? I see you there, AJ. Slather me up with horse Vaseline and toss me down a hallway, baby." "I see you do, oh Dick. Slather me up, baby, and toss me down that hallway." The grocers. The grocers. Oh, the grocers. Nearly closed, with perhaps 2 shutters down, or 1, but through those gaps such glimpses. It was not alone that the scales descending on the counter made a merry sound, or that the twine and roller parted company so briskly, or that the canisters were rattled up and down like juggling tricks, or even that the blended scents of tea and coffee were so grateful to the nose, or even that the raisins were so plentiful and rare, the almonds so extremely white, the sticks of cinnamon so long and straight, the other spices so delicious, the candied fruit so caked and spotted with molten sugar as to make the coldest lookers-on feel faint and subsequently bilious. Nor was it that the figs were moist and pulpy, or that the French plums blushed in modest tartness from their highly decorated boxes, or that everything was good to eat and in its Christmas dress, but the customers were all so hurried and so eager in the hopeful promise of the day that they tumbled up against each other at the door, crashing their wicker baskets wildly, and left their purchases upon the counter, and came running back to fetch them, and committed hundreds of the like mistakes in the best humor possible, while the grocer and his people were so frank and fresh that the polished hearts with which they fastened their aprons behind might have been their own, worn outside for general inspection, and for Christmas dolls to peck at if they chose. But soon the steeples called good people all to church and chapel, and away they came, flocking through the streets in their best clothes, and with their gayest faces. At the same time there emerged from scores of by-streets, lanes, and nameless turnings, innumerable people, carrying their dinners to the baker shops. The sight of these poor revelers appeared to interest the spirit very much, for he stood with Scrooge beside him in a baker's doorway, and taking off the covers as their bearers passed, sprinkled incense on their dinners from his torch. It was a very uncommon kind of torch, for once or twice, when there were angry words between some dinner carriers who had jostled each other, he shed a few drops of water on them from it, and their good humor was restored directly, for they said it was a shame to quarrel upon Christmas Day. And so it was. God love it, so it was. In time the bells ceased, and the bakers were shut up, and yet there was a genial shadowing forth of all these dinners and the progress of their cooking, and the thawed blotch of wet baker's oven, where the pavement smoked as if its stones were cooking too. Maverick Hunter. Technically you can time out the 8-ball chastity, but you would have to time out stream elements to make it happen. So, like the entire stream elements bot would be timed out. But if you do that, obviously the 8-ball can't say anything then. Okay, Maverick. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Is there a peculiar flavor in what you sprinkle from your torch? Asked Scrooge. There is my own. Would it apply to any kind of dinner on this day? Asked Scrooge. To any kind given to a poor one most. Why to a poor one most? Asked Scrooge. Because it needs it most. Spirit, said Scrooge, after a moment's thought. I wonder you, of all the beings in the many worlds about us, should desire to cramp these people's opportunities of innocent enjoyment. Aye, cried the spirit. You would deprive them of their means of dining every 7th day, often the only day on which they can be said to dine at all, said Scrooge. Wouldn't you? Aye, cried the spirit. You seek to close these places on the 7th day, said Scrooge. And it comes to the same thing. I seek, exclaimed the spirit. Forgive me if I am wrong. It has been done in your name, or at least in that of your family, said Scrooge. There are some upon this earth of yours, returned the spirit, who lay claim to know us, and who do their deeds of passion, pride, ill will, hatred, envy, bigotry, and selfishness in our name, who are as strange to us and all of our kith and kin, as if they had never lived. Remember that, and charge their doings on themselves, not us. Scrooge promised that he would, and they went on, invisible, as they had been before, into the suburbs of the town. It was a remarkable quality of the ghost, which Scrooge had observed at the baker's, that notwithstanding his gigantic size, he could accommodate himself to any place with ease. Then he stood beneath a low roof quite as gracefully and like a supernatural creature as it was possible he could have done in any lofty hall. Hello, G. Mike. How's it going over there? I hope that you're doing well tonight, since I saw you just a few hours ago. And welcome. Tonight we're reading Christmas Every Day and the 3rd chapter of A Christmas Carol. And perhaps it was the pleasure the good spirit had in showing off this power of his, or else it was his own kind, generous, hearty nature, and his sympathy with all poor men that led him straight to Scrooge's clerks. For there he went, and took Scrooge with him, holding to his robe, and on the threshold of the door the spirit smiled and stopped to bless Bob Cratchit's dwelling with the sprinkling of his torch. Think of that. Bob had but 15 bob a week himself. He pocketed on Saturdays but 15 copies of his Christian name. And yet the ghost of Christmas present blessed his 4-roomed house. Then uprose Mrs. Cratchit, Cratchit's wife, dressed out but poorly in a twice-turned gown, but brave in ribbons, which are cheap, and make a goodly show for 6pence. And she laid the cloth, assisted by Belinda Cratchit, second of her daughters, also brave in ribbons, while Master Peter Cratchit plunged a fork into the saucepan of potatoes, and getting the corners of his monstrous shirt collar, Bob's private property, conferred upon his son and heir, in honor of the day, into his mouth. Rejoiced to find himself so gallantly attired, and yearned to show his linen in the fashionable parks. And now 2 smaller Cratchits, boy and girl, came tearing in, screaming that outside the baker's they had smelt the goose, and known it for their own, and basking in luxurious thoughts of sage and onion, these young Cratchits danced about the table, and exalted Master Peter Cratchit to the skies, while he, not proud although his collars nearly choked him, blew the fire until the slow potatoes, bubbling up, knocked loudly at the saucepan lid, to be let out and peeled. How's everybody doing out there? I hope that you're enjoying yourselves, soulmates, and that you find this very pleasant and relaxing as always, my friends. Just chilling. That's good. Maverick is still having it out with the 8-ball. That's okay. Odick, too. You're welcome, Odick. Oh, thank you, Chastity. I appreciate it. What has ever got your precious father, then? Said Mrs. Cratchit. And your brother Tiny Tim and Martha weren't as late last Christmas Day by half an hour. Here's Martha, mother, said a girl, appearing as she spoke. Here's Martha, mother, cried the 2 young Cratchits. Hurrah, there's such a goose, Martha. Why, bless your heart alive, my dear, how late you are, said Mrs. Cratchit, kissing her a dozen times, and taking off her shawl and bonnet for her with officious zeal. We'd a deal of work to finish up before night. We'd a deal of work to finish up last night, replied the girl, and had to clear away this morning, mother. Well, never mind, so long as you are come, said Mrs. Cratchit. Sit ye down before the fire, my dear, and have a warm, Lord bless ye. No, there's father coming. No, there's father coming, cried the 2 young Cratchits, who were everywhere at once. Hide, Martha, hide. So Martha hid herself, and in came little Bob, the father, with at least 3 feet of comforter exclusive of the fringe, hanging down before him, and his threadbare clothes darned up and brushed, to look seasonable, and Tiny Tim upon his shoulder. Alas, for Tiny Tim, he bore a little crutch and had his limbs supported by an iron frame. "Why, where's our Martha?" cried Bob Cratchit, looking round. "Not coming," said Mrs. Cratchit. "Not coming," said Bob, with a sudden declension in his high spirits, for he had been Tim's blood horse all the way from church, and had come home rampant. "Not coming upon Christmas Day." Martha didn't like to see him disappointed, if it were only in joke, so she came out prematurely from behind the closet door and ran into his arms, while the two young Cratchits hustled Tiny Tim and bore him off into the wash-house, that he might hear the pudding singing in the copper. Oh, yeah, that's right, G-Mike had himself a nice drink. A very fancy drink, you might say. Very classy. This 8-ball is a chat command, G-Mike, that you can summon by typing !8ball with no spaces, and then ask it a yes or no question. And it will give you an answer. "And how did little Tim behave?" asked Mrs. Cratchit, when she had rallied Bob on his credulity, and Bob had hugged his daughter to his heart's content. "As good as gold," said Bob, "and better. Somehow he gets thoughtful, sitting by himself so much, and thinks the strangest things you've ever heard. He told me coming home that he hoped the people saw him in the church because he was a cripple, and it might be pleasant to them to remember upon Christmas Day, who made lame beggars walk and blind men see." Bob's voice was tremulous when he told them this, and trembled more when he said that Tiny Tim was growing strong and hearty. His active little crutch was heard upon the floor. And back came Tiny Tim, before another word was spoken, escorted by his brother and sister to his stool before the fire. And while Bob, turning up his cuffs, as if, poor fellow, they were capable of being made more shabby, compounded some hot mixture in a jug with gin and lemons, and stirred it round and round, and put it on the hob to simmer, Master Peter and the two ubiquitous young Cratchits went to fetch the goose, with which they soon returned in high procession. You guys are really discovering the 8-ball. I think I need some new responses on it. It holds no bias. All answers are randomized, but they're very spicy answers. Thank you, Amy. I'm glad you like that. Such a bustle ensued that you might have thought a goose, the rarest of all birds, a feathered phenomenon, to which a black swan was a matter of course. And in truth, it was something very like it in that house, Mrs. Cratchit made the gravy ready beforehand in a little saucepan, hissing hot. Master Peter mashed the potatoes with incredible vigor. Miss Belinda sweetened up the applesauce. Martha dusted the hot plates. Bob took Tiny Tim beside him in a tiny corner at the table. The two young Cratchits set chairs for everybody, not forgetting themselves, and mounting guard upon their posts, crammed spoons into their mouths, lest they should shriek for goose before their turn came to be helped. At last the dishes were set on, and grace was said. It was succeeded by a breathless pause, as Mrs. Cratchit, looking slowly all along the carving knife, prepared to plunge it in the breast. But when she did, and when the long-expected gush of stuffing issued forth, one murmur of delight arose all round the board, and even Tiny Tim, excited by the two young Cratchits, beat on the table with the handle of his knife, and feebly cried, "Hurrah!" Oh boy, Abby got one of the worst answers you could. Sorry, Abby. There never was such a goose. Bob said he didn't believe there ever was such a goose cooked. Its tenderness and flavor, size and cheapness were the themes of universal admiration, eked out by applesauce and mashed potatoes. It was a sufficient dinner for the whole family, indeed, as Mrs. Cratchit said with great delight, surveying one small atom of a bone upon the dish. They hadn't ate it all at last. Yet every one had enough, and the youngest Cratchits in particular were steeped in sage and onion to the eyebrows. But now, the place being changed by Miss Belinda, Mrs. Cratchit left the room alone, too nervous to bear witness, to take the pudding up and bring it in. It looks like our 8-ball is getting a little bit more sensitive, my friends. My goodness. Don't be shy, 8-ball. Suppose it should not be done enough. Suppose it should break in turning out. Suppose somebody should have got over the wall of the backyard and stolen it while they were merry with the goose, a supposition at which the two young Cratchits became livid. All sorts of horrors were supposed. Hello! A great deal of steam. The pudding was out of the copper. A smell like a washing day. That was the cloth. A smell like an eating house and a pastry cook's next door to each other, with a laundress's next door to that. That was the pudding. In half a minute, Mrs. Cratchit entered, flushed, but smiling proudly, with the pudding like a speckled cannonball, so hard and firm, blazing in half of a half-quartern of ignited brandy, and bedight with Christmas holly stuck into the top. Llama Llama Red Pajama. It depends how recent it is, G. Mike. Llama Llama Red Pajama. Cratchit said, and calmly too, that he regarded as the greatest success achieved by Mrs. Cratchit since their marriage. Mrs. Cratchit said that now the weight was off her mind. She would confess she had her doubts about the quantity of flour. Everybody had something to say about it, but nobody said or thought it was at all small pudding for a large family. It would have been flat heresy to do so. Any Cratchit would have blushed to hint at such a thing. At last the dinner was all done. The cloth was cleared, the hearth swept, and the fire made up. The compound and the jug being tasted and considered perfect, apples and oranges were put upon the table, and a shovel full of chestnuts on the fire, and all the Cratchit's family drew round the hearth in what Bob Cratchit called a circle, meaning half a one, and at Bob Cratchit's elbow stood the family display of glass, 2 tumblers and a custard cup without a handle. These held the hot stuff from the jug. However, as well as golden goblets would have done, and Bob served it out with beaming looks, while the chestnuts on the fire sputtered and cracked noisily. Then Bob proposed, "A Merry Christmas to us all, my dears. God bless us," which the family re-echoed. "God bless us, every one," said Tiny Tim, the last of all. He sat very close to his father's side, upon his little stool. Bob held his withered little hand in his, as if he loved the child, and wished to keep him by his side, and dreaded that he might be taken from him. "Spirit," said Scrooge, with an interest he had never felt before, "tell me if Tiny Tim will live." "I see a vacant seat," replied the ghost, "in the poor chimney corner, and a crutch without an owner, carefully preserved. If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, the child will die." "No, no," said Scrooge. "Oh, no, kind spirit. Say he will be spared." "If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, none other of my race," returned the ghost, "will find him here. What then? If he be like to die, he had better do it, and decrease the surplus population." Scrooge hung his head to hear his own words quoted by the spirit, and was overcome with penitence and grief. "Man," said the ghost, "if man you be in heart, not adamant, forbear that wicked cant until you have discovered what the surplus is, and where it is. Will you decide what men shall live, what men shall die? It may be that in the sight of heaven you are more worthless and less fit to live than millions like this poor man's child. Oh God, to hear the insect and the leaf pronouncing on the too much life among his hungry brothers in the dust." Scrooge bent before the ghost's rebuke, and trembling cast his eyes upon the ground, but he raised them speedily, on hearing his own name. "Abby," the ghost, the 8-ball said it again. "You finally found what triggers the 8-ball, Abby. Congratulations." Mr. Scrooge, said Bob. I'll give you Mr. Scrooge, the founder of the feast. The founder of the feast, indeed, cried Mrs. Cratchit, reddening. I wish I had him here. I'd give him a piece of my mind to feast upon, and I hope he'd have a good appetite for it. My dear, said Bob, the children. Christmas Day. It should be Christmas Day, I'm sure, she said, on which one drinks the health of such an odious, stingy, hard, unfeeling man as Mr. Scrooge. You know he is, Robert. Nobody knows it better than you do, poor fellow. My dear, was Bob's mild answer. Christmas Day. I'll drink his health for your sake and the day's, said Mrs. Cratchit. Not for his. Long life to him. A Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. He'll be very merry and very happy, I have no doubt. The children drank the toast after her. It was the first of their proceedings, which had no heartiness. Tiny Tim drank it last of all, but he didn't care twopence for it. Scrooge was the ogre of the family. The mention of his name cast a dark shadow on the party, which was not dispelled for full 5 minutes. After it had passed away, they were 10 times merrier than before, from the mere relief of Scrooge the Baleful being done with. Bob Cratchit told them how he had a situation in his eye for Master Peter, which would bring in, if obtained, full 5 and 6 pence weekly. The two young Cratchits laughed tremendously at the idea of Peter's being a man of business, and Peter himself looked thoughtfully at the fire from between his collars, as if he were deliberating what particular investments he should favor when he came into the receipt of that bewildering income. Martha, who was a poor apprentice at a milliner's, then told them what kind of work she had to do, and how many hours she worked at a stretch, and how she meant to lie abed tomorrow morning for a good long rest, tomorrow being a holiday she passed at home, and how she had seen a countess and a lord some days before, and how the lord was much about as tall as Peter, at which Peter pulled up his collar so high that you couldn't have seen his head if you had been there. All this time the chestnuts in the jug went round, and by they had a song about a lost child traveling in the snow from Tiny Tim, who had a plaintive little voice and sang it very well indeed. Abby. There was nothing of high mark in this. They were not a handsome family, they were not well dressed. The shoes were far from being waterproof. The clothes were scanty, and Peter might have known, and very likely did, the inside of a pawnbroker's. But they were happy, grateful, pleased with one another, and contented with the time. And when they faded, and looked happier yet in the bright sprinklings of the spirit's torch at parting, Scrooge had his eye upon them, and especially on Tiny Tim, until the last. By this time it was getting dark and snowing pretty heavily, and as Scrooge and the spirit went along the streets, the brightness of the roaring fires in kitchens, parlors, and all sorts of rooms was wonderful. Here, the flickering of the blaze showed preparations for a cozy dinner, with hot plates baking through and through before the fire, and deep red curtains ready to be drawn to shut out cold and darkness. There all the children of the house were running out into the snow to meet their married sisters, brothers, cousins, uncles, aunts, and be the first to greet them. Here again were shadows on the window blind of guests assembling, and there a group of handsome girls, all hooded and fur-booted, and all chattering at once, tripped lightly off to some near neighbor's house, where woe upon the single man who saw them enter. Artful witches, well they knew it, in a glow. Mamers, thanks for those 10 bits. I appreciate it. I heart you too, Mamers. Doo-doo, doo-doo. Ooh, ooh. Yeah, let's go. Let's go. Yeah. Ooh. That's right. Thank you, Mamers. But if you had judged from the numbers of people on their way to friendly gatherings, you might have thought that no one was at home to give them welcome when they got there. Instead of every house expecting company and piling up its fires, half chimney high, blessings on it, how the ghost exulted, how it bared its breadth of breast, and opened its capacious palm and floated on, outpouring with a generous hand its bright and harmless mirth on everything within its reach. The very lamplighter who ran on before, dotting the dusky street with specks of light, and who was dressed to spend the evening elsewhere, laughed out loudly as the spirit passed, though little kenned the lamplighter that he had any company but Christmas. And now, without a word of warning from the ghost, they stood upon a bleak and desert moor, where monstrous masses of rude stone were cast about it, as though it were the burial place of giants, and water spread itself wheresoever it listed, or would have done so but for the frost that held it prisoner, and nothing grew but moss and furze, and coarse rank grass. Down in the west the setting sun had left a streak of fiery red, which glared upon the desolation for an instant, like a sullen eye, and frowning lower, lower, lower yet, was lost in the thick gloom of darkest night. What place is this? What place is this? Asked Scrooge. A place where miners live, who labor in the bowels of the earth, returned the spirit. But they know me. See? Thank you for following, Swanky Cheese. I'm glad you're here with us, and I hope that you find this very pleasant and relaxing. A light shone from the window of a hut, and swiftly they advanced towards it. Passing through the wall of marten stone, they found a cheerful company assembled round a glowing fire. An old man and woman, with their children, and their children's children, and another generation beyond that, all decked out gaily in their holiday attire. The old man, in a voice that seldom rose above the howling of the wind upon that barren waste, was singing them a Christmas song. It had been a very old song when he was a boy, and from time to time they all joined in the chorus. So surely as they raised their voices, the old man got quite blithe and loud, and so surely as they stopped, his vigor sank again. The spirit did not tarry here, but bade Scrooge hold his robe, and passing on above the moor, sped whither? Not to sea, to sea. To Scrooge's horror, looking back, he saw the last of land, a frightful range of rocks behind them, and his ears were deafened by the thundering of water as it rolled and roared and raged among the dreadful caverns it had worn and fiercely tried to undermine the earth. Well, Mike, I appreciate it. I certainly hope so. Built upon a dismal reef of sunken rocks, some league or so from shore, on which the waters chafed and dashed, the wild year through, there stood a solitary lighthouse. Great heaps of seaweed clung to its base, and storm birds, born of the wind, one might suppose, as seaweed of the water, rose and fell about it, like the waves they skimmed. But even here, two men who watched the light had made a fire that through the loophole in the thick stone wall shed out a ray of brightness on the awful sea, joining their horny hands over the rough table at which they sat. They wished each other Merry Christmas in their can of grog, and one of them, the elder two, with his face all damaged and scarred with hard weather, as the figurehead of an old ship might be, struck up a sturdy song that was like a gale in itself. Again the ghost sped on, above the black and heaving sea, on, until being far away, as he told Scrooge, from any shore, they lighted on our ship. They stood beside the helmsman at the wheel, the lookout in the bow, the officers who had the watch, dark, ghostly figures in their several stations. But every man among them hummed a Christmas tune, or had a Christmas thought, or spoke below his breath to his companion of some bygone Christmas day, with homeward hopes belonging to it, and every man on board, waking or sleeping, good or bad, had had a kinder word for another on that day than on any day in the year, and had shared, to some extent, in its festivities, and had remembered those he cared for at a distance, and had known that they delighted to remember him. It was a great surprise to Scrooge, while listening to the moaning of the wind, and thinking what a solemn thing it was to move on through the lonely darkness over an unknown abyss, whose depths were secrets as profound as death. It was a great surprise to Scrooge, while thus engaged, to hear a hearty laugh. It was a much greater surprise to Scrooge to recognize it as his own nephew's, and to find himself in a bright, dry, gleaming room, with the spirit standing smiling by his side, and looking at that same nephew with approving affability. Laughed Scrooge's nephew. If you should happen by any unlikely chance to know a man more blessed in laugh than Scrooge's nephew, all I can say is, I should like to know him too. Introduce him to me, and I'll cultivate his acquaintance. It is a fair, even-handed, noble adjustment of things, that while there is infection and disease and sorrow, there is nothing in the world so irresistibly contagious as laughter and good humor. When Scrooge's nephew laughed, in this way, holding his sides, rolling his head, and twisting his face into the most extravagant contortions. Scrooge's niece by marriage laughed as heartily as he, and their assembled friends, being not a bit behindhand, roared out lustily. "He said that Christmas was a humbug as I live," cried Scrooge's nephew. "He believed it, too." "More shame for him, Fred," said Scrooge's niece, indignantly. "Bless those women. They never do anything by halves. They are always in earnest. Hello there, Mills. How are you doing? It's good to see you, and I hope that you're doing well tonight." Surprise, surprise. You took more meds. How are you feeling, Mills? I hope you're not feeling too poor right now. But if so, I hope that you get better very soon. She was very pretty, exceedingly pretty, with a dimpled, surprised-looking capital face, a ripe little mouth that seemed made to be kissed, as it no doubt was, all kinds of good little dots about her chin that melted into one another when she laughed, and the sunniest pair of eyes you ever saw in any little creature's head. Altogether, she was what you would have called provoking, you know, but satisfactory, too. Oh, perfectly satisfactory. You can't breathe. Okay, well, good night, Mouse. "He's a comical old fellow," said Scrooge's nephew. "That's the truth. And not so pleasant as he might be. However, his offenses carry their own punishment, and I have nothing to say against him. I'm sure he is very rich, Fred," hinted Scrooge's niece. "At least you always tell me so." "What of that, my dear?" said Scrooge's nephew. "His wealth is of no use to him. He doesn't do any good with it. He don't make himself comfortable with it. He hasn't got the satisfaction of thinking that he is ever going to benefit us with it. I have no patience with him," observed Scrooge's niece. Scrooge's nieces, sisters, and all the other ladies expressed the same opinion. "Oh, I have," said Scrooge's nephew. "I am sorry for him. I couldn't be angry with him if I tried. Who suffers by his ill whims? Himself, always. Here he takes it into his head to dislike us, and he won't come and dine with us. What's the consequence? He don't lose much of a dinner." "Indeed, I think he loses a very good dinner," interrupted Scrooge's niece. Everybody else said the same, and they must be allowed to have been competent judges because they had just had dinner, and with the dessert upon the table, were clustered round the fire by lamplight. "Well, I'm very glad to hear it," said Scrooge's nephew, because I haven't great faith in these young housekeepers. What do you say, Topper?" Topper had clearly got his eye upon one of Scrooge's niece's sisters, for he answered that a bachelor was a wretched outcast, who had no right to express an opinion on the subject. Whereas Scrooge's niece's sister, the plump one with the lace stocker, not the one with the roses, blushed. "Do go on, Fred." "Do go on, Fred," said Scrooge's niece, clapping her hands. "He never finishes what he begins to say. He is such a ridiculous fellow." Scrooge's nephew revelled in another laugh, and as it was impossible to keep the infection off, though the plump sister tried hard to do it with aromatic vinegar, his example was unanimously followed. "I was only going to say," said Scrooge's nephew, "that the consequence of his taking a dislike to us and not making merry with us is, as I think, that he loses some pleasant moments which could do him no harm. I am sure he loses pleasanter companions than he can find in his own thoughts, either in his mouldy old office or his dusty chambers. I mean to give him the same chance every year, whether he likes it or not, for I pity him. He may rail at Christmas till he dies, but he can't help thinking better of it. I defy him. If he finds me going there in good temper year after year and saying, 'Uncle Scrooge, how are you?' if it only puts him in the vein to leave his poor clerk £50, that's something. And I think I shook him yesterday." It was their turn to laugh now at the notion of his shaking Scrooge. But being thoroughly good-natured and not much caring what they laughed at, so that they laughed at any rate, he encouraged them in their merriment, and passed the bottle joyously. After tea they had some music, for they were a musical family, and knew what they were about. When they sung a glee or catch, I can assure you, especially Topper, who could growl away in the bass like a good one, and never swell the large veins in his forehead, or get red in the face over it. Scrooge's niece played well upon the harp, and played among other tunes a simple little air, a mere nothing, you might learn to whistle it in 2 minutes, which had been familiar to the child who fetched Scrooge from the boarding school, as he had been reminded by the ghost of Christmas past. When this strain of music sounded, all the things that ghost had shown him came upon his mind. He softened more and more, and thought that if he could have listened to it often years ago, he might have cultivated the kindnesses of life for his own happiness with his own hands, without resorting to the sexton's spade that buried Jacob Marley. But they didn't devote the whole evening to music. After a while they played at forfeits, for it is good to be children sometimes, and never better than at Christmas, when its mighty founder was a child himself. Stop! There was first a game at blind man's buff. Of course there was. And I no more believe Topper was really blind than I believe he had eyes in his boots. My opinion is that it was a done thing between him and Scrooge's nephew, and that the ghost of Christmas present knew it. The way he went after that plump sister and the lace stocker was an outrage on the credulity of human nature, knocking down the fire irons, tumbling over the chairs, bumping against the piano, smothering himself among the curtains. Wherever she went, there he went. He always knew where the plump sister was. He wouldn't catch anybody else. If you had fallen up against him, as some of them did on purpose, he would have made a feint of endeavoring to seize you, which would have been an affront to your understanding, and would instantly have sidled off in the direction of the plump sister. She often cried out that it wasn't fair, and it really was not. But when at last he caught her, when, in spite of all her silken rustlings and her rapid flutterings past him, he got her into a corner whence there was no escape, then his conduct was the most execrable. For his pretending not to know her, his pretending that it was necessary to touch her headdress, and further to assure himself of her identity by pressing a certain ring upon her finger, and a certain chain about her neck, was vile, monstrous. No doubt she told him her opinion of it, when, another blind man being in office, they were so very confidential together, behind the curtains. Scrooge's niece was not one of the blind man's buff party, but was made comfortable with a large chair and a footstool in a snug corner, where the ghost and Scrooge were close behind her. But she joined in the forfeits, and loved her love to admiration with all the letters of the alphabet. Likewise, at the game of how, when, and where, she was very great, and to the secret joy of Scrooge's nephew, beat her sisters hollow, though they were sharp girls too, as Topper could have told you. There might have been 20 people there, young and old, but they all played, and so did Scrooge, for wholly forgetting in the interest he had in what was going on, that his voice made no sound in their ears. He sometimes came out with his guess quite loud, and very often guessed quite right, too. For the sharpest needle, best Whitechapel, warranted not to cut in the eye, was not sharper than Scrooge, blunt as he took it in his head to be. The ghost was greatly pleased to find him in this mood, and looked upon him with such favor that he begged like a boy to be allowed to stay until the guests departed. But this, the spirit said, could not be done. "Here is a new game," said Scrooge. "1 half-hour, spirit, only one." It was a game called Yes and No, where Scrooge's nephew had to think of something, and the rest must find out what. He only answering to the questions yes or no, as the case was. The brisk fire of questioning to which he was exposed elicited from him that he was thinking of an animal, a live animal, rather a disagreeable animal, a savage animal, an animal that growled and grunted sometimes, and talked sometimes, and lived in London, and walked about the streets, and wasn't made a show of, and wasn't led by anybody, and didn't live in a menagerie, and was never killed in the market, and was not a horse, or an ass, or a cow, or a bull, or a tiger, or a dog, or a pig, or a cat, or a bear. At every fresh question that was put to him, this nephew burst into a fresh roar of laughter, and was so inexpressibly tickled that he was obliged to get up off the sofa and stamp. At last the plump sister, falling into a similar state, cried out, "I have found it out. I know what it is, Fred. I know what it is." "What is it?" cried Fred. "It's your Uncle Scrooge." Which it certainly was. Admiration was a universal sentiment, though some objective that reply to "Is it a bear?" ought to have been yes, inasmuch as an answer in the negative was sufficient to have diverted their thoughts from Mr. Scrooge, supposing they had ever had any tendency that way. "He has given us Plenty of merriment, I am sure, said Fred. And it would be ungrateful not to drink his health. Here's a glass of mulled wine, ready to our hand at the moment, and I say, Uncle Scrooge. Well, Uncle Scrooge, they cried. A Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to the old man wherever he is, said Scrooge's nephew. He wouldn't take it from me, but may he have it, nevertheless. Uncle Scrooge. Uncle Scrooge had imperceptibly become so gay and light of heart that he would have pledged the unconscious company in return and thanked them in an inaudible speech if the ghost had given him time. But the whole scene had passed off in the breath of the last words spoken by his nephew, and he and the spirit were again upon their travels. Much they saw and far they went, and many homes they visited, but always with a happy end. The spirits stood beside sick beds, and they were cheerful on foreign lands, and they were close at home by struggling men, and they were patient in their greater hope by poverty, and it was rich. In almshouse, hospital, and jail, in misery's every refuge, a vain man in his little brief authority had not made fast the door and barred the spirit out. He left his blessing and taught Scrooge his precepts. It was a long night, if it were only a night, but Scrooge had his doubts of this, because the Christmas holidays appeared to be condensed into the space of time they passed together. It was strange, too, that while Scrooge remained unaltered in his outward form, the ghost grew older, clearly older. Scrooge had observed this change, but never spoke of it until they left the children's 12th night party. When looking at the spirit as they stood together in an open place, he noticed that its hair was gray. "Are spirits' lives so short?" asked Scrooge. "My life upon this globe is very brief," replied the ghost. "It ends tonight." "Tonight?" cried Scrooge. "Tonight at midnight. Hark! The time is drawing near." The chimes were ringing the 11:15 at that moment. "Forgive me if I am not justified in what I ask," said Scrooge, looking intently at the spirit's robe. "But I see something strange, not belonging to yourself, protruding from your skirts. Is it a foot or a claw?" "It might be a claw, for the flesh there is upon it," was the spirit's sorrowful reply. "Look here." From the foldings of its robe, it brought 2 children, wretched, abject, frightful, hideous, miserable. They knelt down at its feet and clung upon the outside of its garment. "Oh, man, look here. Look, down here," exclaimed the ghost. They were a boy and girl, yellow, meager, ragged, scowling, wolfish, but prostrate too in their humility, where a graceful youth should have filled their features out and touched them with its freshest tints. A stale and shriveled hand like that of age had pinched and twisted them and pulled them into shreds. Where angels might have sat enthroned, devils lurked and glared out menacing. No change, no degradation, no perversion of humanity in any grade. Through all the mysteries of wonderful creation has monsters half so horrible and dread. Scrooge started back, appalled. Having them shown to him in this way, they tried to say they were fine children, but the words choked themselves, rather than be parties to a lie of such enormous magnitude. "Spirit, are they yours?" Scrooge could say no more. "They are man's," said the spirit, looking down upon them, "and they cling to me, appealing from their fathers. This boy is ignorance, this girl is want. Beware them both, and all of their degree. But most of all beware this boy, for on his brow I see that written which is doom, and lest the writing be erased. Deny it," cried the spirit, stretching out his hand toward the city. "Slender those who tell it ye. Admit it for your Admit it for your factious purposes, and make it worse, and bide the end. Have they no refuge or resource?" cried Scrooge. "Are there no prisons?" said the spirit, turning on him for the last time with his own words. "Are there no workhouses?" The bell struck 12. Scrooge looked about him for the ghost and saw it not. As the last stroke ceased to vibrate, he remembered the prediction of old Jacob Marley, and lifting up his eyes beheld a solemn phantom, draped and hooded, coming like a mist along the ground towards him. And that marks the end of Chapter 3 of A Christmas Carol. Alright, G-Mike. I'll see you later. Thanks for joining me. I hope to see you again very soon, my friend. Well, I do believe this is a good place to put a pin in things for right now, guys. There's 2 more chapters left in A Christmas Carol, and the last one is very short. The last one is not very long at all. I'll tell you what. I'd like to thank everyone for joining me tonight. I hope everyone enjoyed themselves. And as always, hope you found it very pleasant and relaxing, my friends. I go by Soulkeeper on YouTube. Soulkeeper ASMR Bedtime Stories on YouTube. I also go by Soulkeeper on Kick, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok. And hope to see you all again very soon, my friends. Have a good night, everybody. Thanks for joining me. And I'll catch you next time. Good night, my friends. Bye-bye, everybody. Good night, Amy. Good night, Yui. And everyone else who's still here, too.